We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly, where we're talking about GRC or RGC or CRG, depending on how you look at it, with Allan Alford. I want to jump back into the conversation, but first we have a few quick announcements. First, Security Weekly Unlocked is going to be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Keynotes will be Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, who I saw last week, it was so good to see her, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register for free and check out our rock star lineup. Also, just as a courtesy reminder, Paul's Security Weekly has made the shift to Wednesdays now, but tomorrow, which is November 10th, we're actually going to begin the broadcast at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. It's now Eastern Standard Time, because InfoSec World Digital is wrapping up at 4 o'clock, and they're going to invite everybody to keep the party going by coming over and checking out Paul's Security Weekly. So show note, tomorrow Wednesday, which is the new normal, but 4 p.m. instead of the usual 6 p.m. is when we start our broadcast. All right, we left off with sort of talking about certain complexities. Priya was bringing up some points. I had a thought that sort of fed into what some of the off-air conversation was in the interim, but I think Allan was saying, it's always important to lead with the business rather than security. And yet, I think we all know so many security professionals that kind of all they see is the security first sort of viewpoint. It's almost like a tunnel vision sometimes. I've often wondered if it's a failure of the people like me, so many of us that came out of the government and various levels of DoD with all sorts of security and cybersecurity training. And because we're of a certain mindset, we have a certain approach to security and sort of see security first, because the risk that we're accustomed to is national security, risk of human life, risk of our protection of our armed forces and our citizens at home or abroad, and so on and so forth. And I know I've met people, and I've certainly felt it sometimes. It's sort of hard to tone that down and just think about risk in more business terms. And I guess there's another side of that too that I've seen where there's certainly a segment of the hacker security end of the spectrum that, again, sort of sees everything through the lens of security first and has a hard time swallowing and absorbing the fact that, well, maybe what is the right or the most secure thing to do isn't pragmatic, isn't going to work out in your businesses or your customers' circumstance. So you need to sort of retool and retrench, and military terms, and come up with a compromise position that makes things as secure as possible given the business constraints. I'm going to flip it back to Priya. Priya, you had an interesting analogy, and let's just jump into it. Let's see where it goes from here. But tell us where you're seeing the parallels of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So what I see here is you are all specialists and techies and understand in a way that the lay person does not what we're talking about, what's going on sort of behind the screens and under the keyboards and in the interwebs. And therefore, you have an opinion about what people should do to mitigate risk and what governance should look like and compliance and all of these things. And your opinions are far more valuable than, for example, my opinion, where I've learned to double click, and that's sort of as far as I can go. But at the same time, we have this exact behavior right now with vaccines, right? There are people who actually know. There are epidemiologists, there are scientists, there are doctors, there are people who've spent, 12, 24, 36, 48 years studying this and being the exact same level of expertise as you are in technology and security. And yet people walk around saying, no, I think I know better. And my opinion should be as valid as yours. And so the reason I was thinking about this morning is I'm right now very angry with Aaron Rodgers, who went to the same college as I did, and is holding himself out because he has a platform, because of his job as someone who's an authority on vaccines, and whether, I think part of what he's saying is whether it's the right thing for him, and he's espousing his own views on how it works. And it must feel very similar to, in the security world, for you to have a conversation with someone who barely knows how to double click, who's explaining to you why your opinion is not that important to them, and they know better, and that they can manage this risk, or they can manage, the company's risk by using their own opinion, as opposed to the, education, knowledge, expertise. And, so I see all of these parallels with this. Jeff had said in a previous show that he said, I drink because people don't change their passwords. And I said, I drink because people don't keep their mouth shut when the police show up, right? But you could really use that in any field, right? All of us are, one could say capitalism only exists because everyone's a dummy about something, right? And every field, whatever you're an expert in, you find it head shaking and enraging that people don't get it, right? Fauci's probably like, I drink because you idiots won't get vaccinated, right? And so you may feel in this conversation and in this space that you are sort of alone in this Sisyphusian battle to get people to understand, Soylent Green is people, change your password, stop, clicking on every link that shows up. And yet people in other sectors are having the same problem in the same moment. And, to quantify risk in a company when let's say you don't have an MBA, you don't understand your role and the consequences of your behavior, if you don't think you're that important in a company, is not that different than someone who's one of, hundreds of players in the NFL who's like, well, the rest of my team is doing it, but I don't have to because I can't possibly understand the risk I am creating, right? So I would just love to hear whether anyone else had that same reaction or sees those similarities. And then if you have you come up with any ideas of how do you explain to people that this is something they should defer on?
Wow.
Allan, go ahead. You're the guest. You start.
All right.
Or Flea if you want to jump in, whatever.
I'm happy to jump in just because, and this is going to sound super weird because I feel like I'm defending idiots. And to some extent, I guess I am defending idiots, especially in the case of the vaccination stuff. But I'm saying that partially tongue in cheek because one of the things that I think we failed as professionals inside of security, compliance, legal, actually everything, and this actually includes some things with regards to medical science, vaccinations, etc., is listening to the impacted audience first and understanding some of those concerns, etc. Now, I don't want to defend some of the idiot athletes who believe that the Earth is flat and they just want to show off that they're actually being independent. Or independent thinkers, even though they're getting all their information from Facebook and all the other idiots. But there is a kernel there of hey, well, did we start leading with empathy, right? And when you think about inside of a business, some of the things that actually causes friction between security practitioners and the rest of the business is that lack of empathy. Of actually saying, it's kind of like Allan alluded towards earlier, actually not just alluded towards, it said it flat out. It's hey, well, what does the business think their primary risks are? How does the business communicate? How does the business view the world? And we have to, to go back to Priya's analogy, there's actually room for us to actually do that as society. It's hey, how are these idiots viewing the world? Okay, well, hey, they believe that shooting yourself up with horse, dewormer is going to cure them because they don't know science. But there's probably something else that we could be doing there to take how they view the world and then actually apply our lens on top of that. So like, okay, well, hey, this is your worldview. Okay, well, let's have a different conversation. If your concern is around, hey, introducing 2FA is going to reduce customer adoption. Okay, well, let's have that conversation. Now I understand what your concern is that's making you hesitant to following some of these security issues. If your concern is how the vaccine was made, okay, well, let's have that conversation. I can educate you, and maybe you'll make a different choice. Geez, I can't believe I'm like defending idiots. Full disclosure, I'm vaccinated, like all, et cetera. But there is something there for us as practitioners to be cautious of. And that's how we view the impacted audience that we're applying these controls to. And some of these controls, whether security, medical, legal, et cetera, are introducing some kind of negative impact to the receiving audience. Not negative impact, it doesn't have to be the world ending, but it is something that they're not happy with. And it's worth us listening to that and figuring out how to adjust our methodologies and our message. So.
Bless your heart, Lee.
Well, on Flea's point, like it's interesting because like after that one episode, I was thinking about it, and we're all just the way humans are. The more we're a specialist in something, the more things it's likely we just don't know anything about, right? And then we have this confusion that I'm just an expert, right? As opposed to I'm only an expert about this one tiny thing. And most of us are flat earthers about something, right? And just don't know it. But when we're talking to the people who know about that thing, they know it, but they figure it out really quickly. And so, to Flea's point, it's actually pretty brilliant, like to approach it from this is not a, well, you're an idiot. I mean, you might be an idiot, but this is your particular blind spot, and my job to educate you in a way that would cut through to anybody, and to be able to explain this so that you start seeing the horizon has a curve in it, right?
Allan, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I'm going to agree with Flea. I think empathy is key. I think, this ties back into what I was saying earlier about leading with business terms. You don't come in screaming, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. What do you mean? Well, 100011101010. Talking binary at the business is going to get you nowhere. You come in and say, we have a business risk. Let's have a business conversation about that business risk. And if you're doing that, you're reaching out and asking questions inherently because you're speaking to a realm. To Priya's point, you probably aren't a business expert. You're not a CEO. You're a CISO. But you can reach out. You can reach out to that space and acknowledge. Your first step in using business terms is to acknowledge that there's a common ground in between you and this other expert who might be a CFO who's all about finance, or the chief legal officer, general counsel, whatever it might be. Everyone has a common ground called the business that they can reach to from their realm of expertise. So start there. Start in the common pool that we can all go wade in together. And if you're empathetic, if you work with them, if you help to coach and educate and inform and get them to understand, then you're doing everything you're supposed to do. And if you can't get it from there, then in my mind, you're up against one of two situations. One is you're truly dealing with just a difficult personality, in which case it's a whole nother conversation. Or you are dealing with a hard business decision that you didn't like, but it came down as a business decision. And in which case there's another story there as well. But I think leading with empathy, leading with common terms, coming out of your realm of expertise into the common area and asking them to do the same goes a long way. I think that's where you start every time.
Allan, you mentioned something at the beginning of the show that I think is related here. You mentioned actually your experience as being a CISO reporting to different parts of the business. Like, hey, there's a part, hey, you reported to the CTO or CIO, you've reported to VP of Ant, you reported to legal, you reported to CFO. I'm actually kind of curious, those different reporting structures, how did that impact GRC at the companies? And also, how did that impact your approach towards talking about and elevating these types of risks?
That's a great question.
Yeah, plus and a minus to every one of those. Absolutely. And I could, I don't know if we have enough time to walk through every one. But at the end of the day, each one of them is going to introduce their own biases and their own preferences, right? So if you're reporting into the CFO, you're reporting into the CFO as a cost center. That's a really risky place to be. You've either got them won over quickly in which case you've got access to the funds, or you don't win them over quickly, in which case, you're going to be measured more by what's not spent than anything else. CIOs, similarly, I think, tend to operate in that same mindset. It's been my experience that most CIOs, you don't get praised as a CIO for the fact that the lights stayed on 364 days a year. You get busted for the one time they were down. And your goal is to maintain a certain baseline of lights don't go down too often, and to do it by spending less. So you tend to be measured more by what you don't spend than by what you do achieve. And security has to be a do achieve mission and not a not spend mission. It's a different mindset. And so leveraging the concerns of those various reporting structures is tantamount to success. Learning what theirs are and what their defaults are is tantamount to success, because you've got to learn how to couch and characterize everything you're doing. If you're talking to a CIO who's proud of, I don't spend and I still achieve baseline results, you're in for a long haul fight, and you better start thinking in terms of, every time I ask for a thing, I'm going to explain how I'm actually saving money and how I already went through 8 alternatives that were significantly more expensive, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to have to think your game based on what their operating MO is. And there's pluses and minuses to each of them. Like general counsel is going to be all about your risks, but sometimes general counsel, no offense to Priya, is way too obsessed with the risks. And you have to back them off and say, there's certain stuff we're just going to accept. A general counsel is a risk advisor the same way a CISO is. And it's an easy trap for either one of them to fall into, to overestimate risk, to over-rotate on a risk, and to be less comfortable than anyone else in the room letting a risk slide. And so you have to be cognizant of that. So it's just, each one you report into is going to give you a different set of pluses and minuses. You just have to learn what they are and learn to navigate them. And it all goes back to that common pool of business language we all go wading in.
I would add this, Allan. I agree with what you're saying, but I think, at least where I have found success in my role most often as a third-party assessor, trying to find creative ways to tell the company I'm working with that the sky is falling, or at least that they're not compliant, or more hopefully putting it in the context of, you're not really reaching your security goals, and that impacts the business. It requires you to be to do everything that you're describing, but also be more than that, because maybe the person that you're talking to or the group that you're talking to in a particular circumstance, the business language is important, but they've got some subtle other thing that's driving them. So to me, it's more important to sort of read the audience. The audience are the people you're speaking to, and try to anticipate what is going to resonate the most with them. And sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes you go into it thinking this will work, and you find out, okay, that just fell flat. Let me try a different approach. Right. And there is no set right. I mean, that's one of the, I think, the nuanced problems of compliance anyway, is not just that it's a checklist, it's that people deep down inside want it to be a checklist. They want to not have to think about it, because there's so many decisions to be made in security, and so many trade-offs and so many risks to take in terms of managing whether we do or don't something, spend our money here or spend our money there, or don't spend it at all. And because it's imprecise, the same people that are screaming, "Oh, it's just a checkbox exercise, we want to do security," are also very thankful if you press them on it, that somebody is telling them to do something, that they are being held to something, that somebody else or some other thing is making the decision for them. That's been my experience often anyway.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a totally fair point.
So the name of our show today is So What? So let me ask you that question, Allan. So what? Why should we care about all this?
Right? So what? Why do we care? At the end of the day, the organization, and we keep saying business in business terms, and by the way, there's plenty of nonprofit organizations and there's plenty of government organizations. Don't call it the business, call it the organization, and call it the organization's mission. At the end of the day, every organization has a mission. Even if you're a public library, your mission is to get more folks coming in the doors and checking out more media and more books, and you decide to make internet computers available because that benefits the community more. You've got a mission, and to be properly leading a GRC function is to be talking to the business about that mission and the risks to that mission. Whatever the goal might be, we're trying to make $1 million in Europe this quarter, or we're trying to get more subscribers to check out books at the library, whatever that mission might be. Your job is to articulate, here's the goal. Here's all the things that can make that goal happen. Here's all the things that can stop that goal from happening. Here's all the hiccups, the gotchas, the potholes, the hurdles, and the things that might get in the way. And here's what I'm prepared to do about those things. Here's how we measure those things. Here's how we deal with those things and manage those things and get them to where the potholes are filled and the hurdles are knocked down before we even get to them. And it's really that simple to me. It's all about understanding the mission. It's all about understanding where the risks, the governance, and the compliance plug into that mission. And it's about doing your absolute best job to articulate that to every nook and cranny of the business, and to your point, in the language they speak in a way that they want to hear it. One of my favorite questions I get asked is, how do you present to the board? And the answer is always, which board? They're all different. And you've got to learn their style if you're going to be successful, to your point.
Yep, very true. Yeah. Kat, Priya, who was that?
Oh, that was me. I was just going to say, yeah, I think adaptability, when we were talking about both from the business leader perspective and the subject matter expert perspective that Priya originally brought up, I was just thinking about it during this chat, and I was like, it seems like a common theme is adaptability and reading the room. And I feel like if you are that SME, you've definitely been there, done that, and you'll be able to read the room and kind of sway people to understand where you're coming from and why that might be the best thing to do for that particular organization. So that's all I had.
Well, I think like it's also useful, your field is not the first one to have to tackle these things, right? How do you convince, basically, like we're now in a world where almost everybody has a device, right? So it's as pervasive as health, right? And you don't have to try to invent wheels or come up with the very first try of how to convince people. You can actually look at how governments have been doing it. So let's go back to the vaccine example, right? You try to explain to people, and then you're like, all right, I got a lot of the people. Then you got the next group. And also just understanding from the outset, just from like an actuarial point of view, how many people are just not going to get it, right? What's a win from the first try? And you need several levels of try. But eventually what we get down to is my favorite, which is bribery, right? So now you get on an MTA, like the subway, New York City subway or bus, and it says like, if you get vaccinated, we're going to give you free rides for like 3 days. And that worked, right? And so all of these different things, because, in terms of adaptability, is understanding the same thing isn't going to work for everyone, even within that corporation, not just which board, but which board member. But also you can look to the billions of dollars that have been spent in research and policy making by governments, because people are people, right? And Soylent Green is people, as we've discussed, and you could just steal from that, right? Start from there and build from that, because those things, they do work. Bribery always works, but there's things short of that too, right? We talk about corporate incentive programs, right? You got whatever gift certificate for changing your password every 6 months or whatever it is. Anyway, we're not alone. We can learn from others' mistakes and their victories.
You've brought up Soylent Green twice now, Priya. I'm starting to worry about you a little bit.
I'm vegan, so it's not me. It's eating the people.
But it was a pill. It was green. Wasn't it advertised as being vegan?
Yeah, soy and lentil. That was the whole idea. They were advertising it as a combination of soy and lentil, and it turned out to be people.
Interesting. All right. Flea, Kat, Priya, any parting questions, thoughts? Before we turn it to Allan for the last word.
Yeah, the only parting thought that I had was actually just thank you, Allan, in particular, actually, for pointing out this idea that business risk is the most important risk for us to actually think about, and it definitely is an area that I think a lot of cybersecurity professionals fall short. So thank you for that very necessary reminder.
Thank you.
Allan, I'll let you have the last word. And of course, we're going to set the stage for continuing this discussion over on your podcast, where hopefully we can focus more on sort of, practical advice, tips of, now what? So we've agreed that this is important. How do we implement it? But give us your thoughts and perhaps a tease for round two.
That's exactly it. We've got the what, which is the GRC, the RGC, the CRG, however you want to put it together, depending on your organization, wherever the priorities should be. That's the what. The so what we've covered. Like, why the heck should the business even care about any of this? And the now what is, once we've gotten them to care, what's our next step? And that to me is the most crucial and the most critical of all. What and so what are what is something you have to get your hands around. So what is something you have to sell. Now what is the execution? We can all have great ideas and be great visionaries. Without the actual execution, we're falling flat and we're doing nothing. We're achieving nothing. And so to me, the now what is really the most important part. So I'm totally looking forward to the next conversation. We're going to have a lot of fun with that, I think.
All righty. Well, we will plan on putting on our boots and our hats and our spurs and stirrups and chaps, and we'll come on over to the Cyber Ranch podcast as soon as we're all able to get on the same calendar. That's going to wrap us today for this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. Allan, thank you so much for joining us today and facilitating this great discussion about risk, governance, and compliance, as it were. As we've mentioned, we're gonna continue the discussion on a future episode of Cyber Ranch podcast. So stay tuned. Next week on Security and Compliance Weekly, at the suggestion of our co-host Liam Downward, we're bringing on a gentleman named Chris Lohr. I hope that's how we pronounce his name. And he's going to lead us in a discussion about the CISA group, not the certification, the government organization. Their recently released guidance on advice and security guidance for MSPs and SMBs. So it'll be a little bit of a different discussion next week, but we're looking forward to it. So stay tuned. Until then, keep tearing down those silos and building the bridges. We're out.